Hi, I'm Danette Chavis, and this is NAAPB News. Today I'm going to be highlighting for you some of the testimony that was given during New York City's NYPD class action lawsuit regarding stops and frisks. Many of you are unaware that the class action lawsuit regarding stops and frisks was a two-part lawsuit. The first part dealt with New York City Housing Authority residents, and the second part dealt with New York City residents at large. You'll be hearing testimony from NYPD officers as well as testimony from those outside the courtroom who were protesting during these proceedings. You'll also hear from me. I was present and also gave testimony as for what I witnessed concerning NYPD's stops and frisks. Have a listen.
Joseph Esposito wrapped up his testimony this week in the stop and frisk trial, Floyd versus City of New York. Esposito was the highest-ranking member of the NYPD until he retired 2 weeks ago after more than 40 years on the job and more than a decade as chief. Each week he ran ComStat meetings where he called in precinct commanders to discuss crime patterns and numbers, the number of stops and collars in various precincts. The chief said repeatedly that he relies on supervisors to ensure that officers comply with NYPD regulations, but conceded that the department has about 10% of bad apples, as he called approximately 3,500 officers who are slackers, who negatively influence other officers, and who are capable of writing bad 350s, filling out the forms officers use to document stops incorrectly. He said these officers are malcontents. They will do as little as possible no matter how well you treat them. He compared them with 10% who do great jobs, no matter how bad you treat them. As he testified previously, Chief Esposito said NYPD officers make quality stops based on reasonable suspicion. When asked by city lawyer Heidi Grossman whether stop and frisk was a form of racial profiling, Esposito said, "Of course not." Under redirect by the Center for Constitutional Rights attorney Jonathan Moore, Esposito said he hasn't heard complaints of racial profiling in stop and frisks by community members. The judge, Shira Scheinlin, was surprised. "You never heard of racial profiling? Don't you get complaints about racial profiling?" she asked. "No," said Chief Esposito. "You never heard complaints about racial profiling?" "No, not from residents," said the chief. "From groups like New York Civil Liberties Union or the Al Sharpton Group, from elected officials, but not from community people. They complain about being stopped, how they were stopped, why they were stopped." "Don't you get complaints from residents, from public housing?" the judge asked. Sounds of incredulity came from NYCHA residents who packed the courthouse. The chief said, "The complaint we get on the street is that I don't know why I was stopped, but not about racial profiling." This is despite figures which show that 88% of people who have been stopped and frisked are black or Latino, and 90% of those stops are innocent of committing any crime. Outside the courthouse, Larry Rushing, at the trial most days, stared at a sculpture of justice. "She looks unhappy," Rushing said. "What did he think of the testimony?"
The chief of department, Esposito, his testimony seems to indicate a lack of concern for what goes on in the streets and a lack of concern with enforcing the proper justice of his police officers when it comes to racial profiling. Basically, he had a hands-off approach.
Another puzzling testimony came from Officer White, the rookie who stopped and cuffed Dominique Sindeaganza near Union Square. During White's testimony, he changed details about the stop twice. When asked if he met with the city's council between the time of his deposition and now, Officer White said yes.
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority residents held a rally in support of the stop and frisk trial. They say the tactic takes an emotional toll on residents and threatens them with eviction. Kyler Cohens lives in Ingersoll Public Housing in Brooklyn, one of the city's oldest housing complexes with 1,000 units. He says stop and frisk criminalizes a segment of the population which has no business being criminalized.
In New York City Housing Authority, not only does it criminalize the people, but it also acts as a fact of displacement for the people. So once you start to get those warrants, then you're able to be displaced from public housing. So we're asking that the federal government uphold the rights of the people, low-income people, and keep us from being displaced from public housing.
So now, because we like to scream and make noise, right? So here goes another chant. And it goes, our children play in the streets. We want fair police. So I'm going to say our children play in the streets, and you're going to say what?
We want fair police.
Our children play in the streets.
A justice advocate, Danette Chavis, who lives in a Lower East Side NYCHA complex, says stop and frisk is not only illegal, it not only racially profiles an entire population, but because of quotas, it pits officer against officer and does nothing to deter crime.
I've seen young men, black males, 15 to 20 years old, rounded up, lined up against walls, and had their pockets searched. ID and identification required for them, for no reason whatsoever, just for the simple fact that they were there. I've seen police officers follow people into their building just to prove that they live where they say they live. I had one young lady that said that an officer went with her to her apartment, and even after her mother had verified, this is my daughter, she lives here, they wanted to see the lease. Okay, total outrageous behavior. A police officer already has authority. He has a gun, he has a badge, he has the department and the state backing him. When you give him carte blanche to enforce policies, irregardless to law, you're creating a monster that you will not even be able to pull back. I wonder, even if the courts say stops and frisks should stop altogether, I wonder if the damage hasn't already been done.
Stop and frisk goes beyond the person stopped, says Deidre Chatham. She says when a black man is stopped, it doesn't just affect him.
It's a family thing it impacts. You have people getting stop and frisked on public housing grounds. You get stop and frisked, it goes to management. Management wants to know why you got stop and frisked on their grounds for trespassing or whatever excuse they give. And you have to be called in. Now your tenancy is at risk. It's ridiculous. My mom lives in public housing. I don't walk. I go in the hallway. I don't want to go in the hallway to throw the trash out with that ID on my pocket because they're always standing there. And they do. They stop and they say, what are you doing? I'm in slippers and pajamas. What do you think I'm doing? With a garbage can. Oh, well, hurry up. I support the policing, but the harassment is ridiculous and it needs to stop. They want communities to work with them, then they have to start working with communities and build some relationship.
The stop and frisk trial continues in federal district court on Monday, April 15th.
Well, you've heard the testimony of those outside the courtroom, as well as testimony from NYPD officers who lied upon the witness stand. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the people. Stops and frisks racially profiled blacks and Hispanics, in addition to violating rights underneath the Constitution. The courts imposed cameras to be worn on those precincts having the highest amounts of arrests underneath the policy. In addition, a special monitor was to be appointed over NYPD operations, and subsequent to that, the Community Safety Act was passed by a vote of the City Council, all of which was vigorously fought against by the mayor and commissioner of that time. We now have a new mayor who ran on a campaign advising an end to stop and frisk. However, one of the first acts committed after being elected into office was the reappointing of a commissioner who some say started stop and frisk in the first place. He is now pushing what is known as the broken window policy, a policy that arrests people for some of the smallest of infractions. Case in point, people have been arrested for simply dozing off on the train after a hard day's work. More about that later. For now, I'm Danette Chavis, and you're watching NAAPB News.